Good morning. This is the Eager Beaver Show.
You are listening to a True North Eager Beaver Media Incorporated podcast. The True North Eager Beaver podcasts are proudly brought to you by our founding sponsors, the Misfit Mysteries from Corvid Moon Publishing, your source for science fiction, fantasy, and cozy mysteries featuring a broad diversity of characters, CanadianTarot.com, your uniquely Canadian online eclectic tarot community, and the Pepper Master, hot pepper sauces made from farm-fresh ingredients to thrill your taste buds and expand your mind. Well, good morning and hello, kids and cubs, and welcome to Season 5 and episode number 765 of the Daily Beaver Morning Show. Always 100% Canadian. Today, recording day is Monday, October 20th, 2025, and it is a rainy day here at the Beaver Lodge. I am your host, the Eager Beaver, pronouns he, him, hey, Mr. Beaver A, and not with me as usual is my good friend, Mr. Grizzly. A big thank you goes to our podcast founding sponsors, the Pepper Master, the Misfit Mysteries from Corvid Moon Publishing, and PsychicTarot.ca. Kids and Cubs, yours truly is back in curling, which means that once every few weeks on Monday mornings, the match is at 9 a.m., which means I do not have time to do a full show. So I'm doing a little pre-record for you on the morning of course, but just a little earlier so that I can catch the bus to get there on time. I look forward to being with you live and in person tomorrow. Of course, today's show may start a little earlier by the time I finish recording this and are able to broadcast it, so it'll be a little later than 7. But I unfortunately would have to be gone by around 7:45 in order to get to the arena on time, which would mean if I did my regular show, I would do my introduction, then my outro, and then that would pretty much be the show. You wouldn't have much content. So I'm going to dispense with a few pleasantries today and just get into the meat of the subject so that the show can air as close to regular time as possible. I hope your mental health is doing well today. How is your mental health today, kids and cubs? Mine is very good. I had a wonderful weekend, but I will tell you more about that, how things are going on the next show. But had a wonderful weekend. Rehearsals went well, all the good stuff. And I'm in a good mood this morning. All right. So to get into today's subject, kits and cubs, the Prime Minister has been criticized a lot lately for not giving longer interviews, 20, 30-minute interviews to Canadian media while he is here. But of course, the Prime Minister is also traveling a lot around the world, particularly given the situation that he has to essentially be our nation's number one salesman at a time where we're trying to reorient our economy at lightning speeds, given that which the United States is doing to us. And well, I wouldn't say necessarily doing to us in one way because they're doing it to everyone, but in the manner in which the United States has decided that it is going to change the game, the rules of the game that the whole world has been playing by for the longest time. And when the Prime Minister was recently in the UK on one of these trips that the Conservatives complain about all the time, he was the trip when the Canadian women's rugby team was playing in the final of the Rugby World Cup. He went there on business and then watched the game, but also took some time to stop in the studios of Bloomberg Financial in London, UK, for an interview with noted journalist Mishal Husain. And in this interview, he revealed a lot about how he sees the job of prime minister. And there were also a lot of insights into some of the moves that he has made and why he has made them that haven't gotten a lot of coverage in the Canadian mainstream media, which favors the horse race and trying to push that narrative. You know, it's Pierre versus the prime minister, and how are they doing? And is Pierre running the narrative? And who's losing a point or two here in the polls? But not so much covering the issue and the why and the how and all that kind of stuff. There seems to be less interest in that over here. But in this interview, he mentions a couple of things along the way that give some insights into the man and into some of the decisions. So I figured I would take some time to present some highlights from the interview. Now, the whole interview I actually recommend, and to be totally honest, um, when I say highlights, I might end up presenting most of it. I might have to do this in two parts if I can't get it all done quickly this morning. But there's a lot of good stuff in there. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lead with the more domestic stuff. And if I have to cut the show uh, in order to be able to be gone, we will have the domestic portion. And then I will do a second part that will have the more international components, because I have been promising you a democracy around the world segment for the last couple of episodes and haven't been able to get around to it. So I might be able to cobble those two things together and have a Beaver International show for you. All right, kids and cubs. So in the studio with Miss Hussein, and the interview usually starts with an easier question come in. She got him to talk a little bit about growing up in Northwest Territories in his childhood and stuff for a little bit, but the question came up very soon in there about why it is he stood for the role of prime minister. Uh, and in this answer, there are some interesting, a little bit of an interesting insight, because our prime minister doesn't so often talk about Pierre Poilievre. I mean, he does from time to time, but he certainly doesn't talk about Pierre Poilievre as often as Pierre Poilievre talks about him. So in this, we get a little bit of insight into what his motivation for running is, and how Pierre played a part in that. All right, so let's cue that up.
Change it.
Did you get elected because of President Trump, really?
I got elected. Well, you'd have to ask the voters of Canada. I think.
Well, you stood because of President Trump, didn't you? You made the choice just before, you announced it just before the inauguration.
I did not stand because of President Trump. No, I stood because I believe that the person who was likely to become prime minister, certainly in all the polling, was not the right person for Canada, that would have been a divisive government in that case, and would have taken our country back as opposed to forward. It turned out to be the case that very quickly, once I was in the leadership campaign, before I became leader of the Liberal Party, and then before the general election campaign, it turned out that President Trump's actions in the trade war, as it's known, really intensified, and then I became more relevant. So certainly, yes, it helped that people made a judgment that I was best placed to deal with it.
So what I like in this answer is that he practices one of these things that we say in the show a lot, is that things historically happen in a certain order in time. And in this case, he's making the case here that, he saw what Pierre was bringing to the party, or what kind of dishes he was bringing to the potluck, and didn't quite think that they were appropriate for where it is that we needed to go. And then, of course, Trump thing came along, and he took office in January, and then started doing certain things. And then, those things helped. Definitely, like he said, they made Mark Carney more relevant. But he is stating that his main reason for running is not so much Trump, because, the election would have happened in November, I guess, and then Trump assumes office in January. If Carney was seriously considering an opportunity, he would have been considering it prior to that, no doubt, prior to November, before it was known that Trump had won. So he's sort of stating that happening. But of course, everything happened with the prime minister prior to the economic statement happening, and then the opportunity opened up. So for him to step in at that moment, I'd have to look at those dates actually specifically to see when it was again that economic statement was, if it was prior to Trump having won or after. But then, we had the prime minister step down, and then we had the leadership race and all that kind of stuff. So there are certain things happened close together. That timeline is really tight around the time that the U.S. election happened, and then the prime minister, Cynthia Chrystia Freeland, did what she did at the fall economic statement, and the prime minister deciding to step down and a race being declared. The dates in that period are a little tight, but prior to all of that, because Pierre had been making himself known that he wanted to be prime minister and had already won the conservative leadership a significant time before the U.S. election. And Mark Carney was indeed providing some advice, and there was an open campaign to try to recruit him with, we all know the will he and won't he game that he was playing for some time. When you put that all together, clearly there was some consideration of this move that was happening prior to Trump being elected for a second time, unfortunately for all of us. My personal editorial addition there. All right, so we continue on in this interview, and he's asked about how easy it is. Well, he's not asked about this. I'm sorry. He volunteers this in the answer. But a lot of parallels that we make between what is going on now, and because we like to look at history to see certain things, there are some parallels between this current government and the Martin Chrétien government. Because we were in a crisis, and the Martin Chrétien government took some time to really explain to us what was going on before having to administer some very difficult medicine. But when they did, we realized that the situation was rather dire, and we knew it was going to hurt, but we agreed to it. And, and we eventually got through the situation and ended up in a good place. But those years, for anybody who talks about it, who's lived through them, you talk to them about today, and there's still a lot of people that go, yeah, but, right? Yeah, we got ourselves in a good fiscal order. Yeah, but look at all the things that got hurt as a result. And we are seeing a lot of the consequences of it today. Our homeless situation, the situation with addictions, healthcare funding being pulled and all that kind of stuff. A lot of these consequences take decades to work themselves through the system, right? And we're seeing that, and we have a lot of things to repair. But we did put ourselves in the appropriate financial footing to be able to do it. And unfortunately, right now, we happen to have a whole bunch of provincial premiers who are of a conservative ideology who seem to not want to invest the money back from where it has been taken and shore up these problems that we are seeing. But the task of convincing people to do hard things can be easier or difficult for certain politicians depending on the time. So Mark Carney was volunteering some thoughts about that in this particular question and answer portion of the interview. Take a look at this.
I was thinking about something you said in 2020 about how it is easier to be a central banker in a democracy than a politician. But it feels like that's not even the half of it, right? You have become prime minister at a time when global trade is disrupted as never before. Global alliances are under pressure as never before. How has it been?
I stand by my earlier statement that it was easier to be a central banker. Well, part of the reason I am in this position is because of what you just described. It's part of the reason why I put myself forward. It's possibly one of the reasons why I was elected. In some respects, I'm going to say an odd thing. In some respects, it's easier when the problems are very clearly out in front of everybody. I think all Canadians understand that the our relationship with the United States has changed fundamentally, that the world is a more dangerous and divided place. And then the question becomes, what do we do about it? And sometimes, just on reflection, if you look back when times were good, quote unquote, but problems were building up, that's when it's more difficult to take the big decisions that are necessary.
Whereas here you know the score.
Here you know that we have to act. It's important to be as open and as possible with people in terms of the assessment of the scale of what needs to be done, and then to be decisive.
I do.
So there you go. In that particular section, again, getting a sense of the Prime Minister's managerial style here, but again, making the point that when the crisis truly is knocking on your door, sometimes because it's unavoidable and everybody can see it, it actually makes the task of leading the nation to do tough things a little easier, ironically or counterintuitively, if one would look at it that way. They next get into talking about trade with the United States and Kuzma and everything. And this section here has three parts. The part that I found the juiciest will be the second part in this, because there's some addressing of the whole sort of elbows up versus elbows down type thing in here. And we get some insights into certain developments along the way on the trade negotiation. But the first one here is about the overall strategy and approach of the Prime Minister when it comes to this trade negotiation. And some very interesting elements about how he sees it.
I do want to explore how much harder your task is as Prime Minister in some of your domestic priorities and certainly your foreign policy priorities, because the United States is not the partner that it has been before and because its priorities have shifted. Of course, you've got specific bilateral issues with the United States, primarily over trade, and the Canadian economy has been hit hard by what President has done, particularly on steel and the auto sector and aluminium. What is your strategy for when the US, Mexico, Canada trade deal is reviewed next summer? Are you hoping the US economy by that stage is in a position where President Trump takes a different view on tariffs?
We want the best for the US economy, just as we want, slightly stronger, we want the best for the Canadian economy. But so no, our strategy is not to expect some weakness in the U.S. economy that is going to change U.S. negotiating position.
I'm just going to stop right here, and I find him interesting. I find it interesting that he says that you're not waiting for this, because I don't know if this is diplomacy or honesty, because there is no doubt that what the United States is doing, or as we call it on the show, it's that penchant for repeatedly punching itself in the dick at some point, is going to show up, and it's going to create some pressure from the inside that could benefit us. And that's probably some of the reasons for which we're dragging our heels a little bit on a couple of things and extending some stuff, waiting for that to happen and that natural pressure to come. So it's interesting to hear him say, no, we're not waiting on that. And yes, we're probably not banking on that, or that's probably not the key thing, but it's not like it wouldn't help. All right, back to the answer.
Our strategy, part of our strategy has been to pursue the best deal for Canada. We have the best trade deal at the moment. 85% of our trade with the United States is tariff-free. We have the lowest average tariff against of any country with the U.S. It's 5.5%. So we're in a good position now, with two important caveats. One is your question: what's going to happen with the renegotiation of what they call USMCA? And secondly, some key sectors: steel, autos, aluminium, forest products being the main ones. We'll make it increasingly clear that in certain sectors, particularly, the integration of the Canadian and U.S. and Mexican economies is essential to U.S. competitiveness. So in steel, in autos, as two examples, that linkages are so tight. They're so tight such that the Canadian content, the U.S. content, in Canadian finished automobiles is higher than the average US content in American automobiles. So we make America stronger in these sectors, and our strategy is to make sure that that is as well understood as possible.
Okay, so
All right. So we get to the first element of that. Again, I think is pretty clear in terms of the answer. The Prime Minister is saying here that trying to take some time to and specific emphasis to the United States and to the president particularly that yes, I understand that you want to make cars in the United States and you only want to make cars in the United States and you don't need our cars. But the problem is that before you get to a state where you're going to be able to make those cars all in the United States without parts made in Canada or all that type of stuff or however it is you want to do it, that's going to take a certain number of years. And in that meantime, you're going to completely decimate your industry such that you will not be producing any cars. Nobody in North America will probably be producing any cars. So the way that things are now, the omelet is too scrambled up to separate the yolk from the albumin at the moment. So, I mean, you can spend your time doing that, but all you're going to do is make sure that nobody gets to eat any omelet, not even yourselves. So, you can frame it however you want for domestic consumption, but you need us. You absolutely do need us, and you won't be able to do that. So it seems that that might be the conversation that's going on, and that might be what's leading to the talk that we've been hearing over the past few weeks of maybe some type of breakthrough on these sectoral tariffs, particularly steel and aluminum. But we'll see more on that. But right now, there's a lot of confusion because that meeting in the awful office was rather positive, but the very next day Nutlick was out there going, it's like, you're going to have to realize, Canada, that it's us first and you're going to be second, and second's a good place to be, but we're going to be first and you're going to be number two and whatever, and we don't want any assembly of cars bought in the United States made outside the United States. So, which is basically saying we want to kill your auto industry. So, and we obviously will not stand for that. So, again, lots of stuff yet to be determined here, but it seems that the strategy is kind of finding a way to make it very clear that if you insist on going down this route, you will ensure that you guys have nothing either. That's where this leads. Hopefully that message is getting through. Now we get to the part that I found really interesting, which is like pretty much about asking about elbows up, elbows down. It's about elbows up, elbows down.
So the prosperity of both countries is at stake. Your language, though, has changed on President Trump since you came to office. Do you remember when you talked about him as a bully that needed to be stood up to? In February, when you were campaigning, we're going to stand up to a bully, we're not going to back down. And yet now you're much more likely to talk in more conciliatory terms. I mean, obviously one is campaigning and one is governing, but perhaps people who wanted you to do the standing up to the bully might feel that you haven't done that as much as you suggested when you were campaigning.
Well, let's be clear the actual situation. We're one of there are two countries effectively that put retaliatory tariffs on the United States. Two countries in the world. We put them on, we kept them on up to a point where they ceased to be effective. We got to a point when we took our retaliatory tariffs off, we had 85% of our trade tariff-free. When we put them on, given the steps that President Trump had taken, it was a third of our trade was tariff-free. So, strikes me that that's pretty effective.
Yeah, but he has shown his power, hasn't he, over you? Like, for example, your digital services tax. You announced it. He hated it. You had to back down on that.
The digital service tax was announced multiple years before. It was just effectively coming in. It was coming into effect. Look, the United States.
And it couldn't because President Trump wasn't having it.
Well, we made a decision in the context. And let's what happened after we took that digital service tax off? Within weeks, the president confirmed, in writing, formally confirmed in an executive order that tariff-free status for the vast majority of our trade.
So there was something broader at stake on trade. I get that. But I just wonder how how you reconcile yourself to that, because it is different from the tone you struck before.
I reckon my responsibility is to get the best possible deal for Canada. We have the best deal in the world at this point. Now, that next issue is, where is the USMCA negotiation going to land? Yeah, the trade agreement, the broader trade agreement is going to land, and that's being prepared for that and working with the U.S. in that. But let's be absolutely clear: the United States does have tremendous leverage in the near term over Canada.
All right, so we'll stop that right there. But remember that when he's talking about leverage, because it's important for the next part. But in this answer, some of the things that I liked here is that, first of all, the way that she asked the question, because that's the most diplomatic way ever to ask the question, what happened to your elbows? That's where you see the sign of a quality journalist, because that question was very, very well framed, and the language that was used to ask the question was very crisp, and you could see it was a tough question, but it wasn't asked in a snarky way, or it wasn't asked in a nasty way, it wasn't asked in a gotcha way. It really is a question that seems to be asked out of a point, like, we've noticed something, there's a shift. Could you please explain that shift? Right? And then, given that shift, the people that wanted a little more of the constantly aggressive type thing, what happened to that? So these questions these are very, very tough questions, and you can see in this one, right? There's some back and forth. She presses him, she pushes him in this one, and he deals with it relatively well. First of all, he makes the point here that retaliatory tariffs, right, worked until they were not being as effective anymore. Sorry, that was my alarm going off there. The alarm that says that's the last minute that I have to be able to get up to do the show at the regular time. See, so there you go. You have the proof that I actually do have an alarm set for it. All right, so he mentions this, and we mentioned that just a few shows ago, that we had actually picked up in another interview on why some of the counter tariffs that he pulled away. We noticed later on that there were more counter tariffs than he had actually previously announced, and we saw that he had stated that when they did the full math on all of them, there were certain extra ones that we had there that were costing us more to administer than we were getting out of them. So he eliminated those two. With this one here, he's saying, we had the counter tariffs on, and again, that things happen in time. When the counter tariffs were put on by former Prime Minister Trudeau, the way that Donald Trump was talking, only about a third of our trade would be protected. So therefore, we hit harder. As negotiations went along, we clearly got some type of concession that made it such that now it's sort of close to 85% of our trade that is not covered by what the U.S. is tariffing. So we removed our counter tariffs to match that, and removed other ones that were not serving us along the way. And then she gets into the digital services tax, which is one of those things that everybody's been saying, you conceded that, and what did we get? And this is something we did mention once on the show, but even we had forgotten about it specifically, because we never mentioned it again, and we like to come back and mention things a few times. But in exchange for that digital services tax, it is true that Donald Trump did sign that executive order stating that anything that was CUSMA compliant trade would be exempt from tariffs. So that secured, at least for as long as something lasts and is permanent in Trump's world, that secured that move from 30% to 85%. So right there in these answers, the Prime Minister states how we got two concessions from the United States along the way that clearly have not been seen as concessions by the Canadian media, and certainly not by the opposition. And since the opposition is doing a good job at setting the agenda with regard to what the media is covering, this is not very common knowledge within the Canadian public. But it seems that we have indeed gotten two pretty large concessions somewhere along the way over the course of these negotiations. Just they're not being trumpeted as concessions and hailed in that way, sadly enough. All right. Then, as we mentioned here earlier, he was talking about the near term and the long term. So, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to back the answer up a little bit so that the Prime Minister can make the shift, because this doesn't come prompted by a question. This is he finishes talking about the elbows part and then tries to make a shift open to another topic. And in this, he also makes a point that we have been making on the show with regard to the numbers, because we are looking at our trade with the United States and trade with other nations, and how our trade from the United States might be going down or steady or whatnot, given everything that's going on. But how is our trade diversifying and growing with other nations? And as we mentioned before, when we talked about this, we were talking about Canada being at an advantage because we had a greater ability than many other nations to be nimble, given the sheer number of free trade agreements that we have already negotiated, the whole legal architecture part of trade that's already been taken care of. But we didn't do the part that involved going out and doing the networking and maximizing the opportunities. We created ourselves the space to be able to go do things with other nations if we wanted to, but we weren't really maximizing it because, well, our deal with the United States was pretty sweet and frankly required less work. So, but the game has changed. Fortunately, because we've done all that, we can just walk in and say, hey, we have this agreement here. Let's sit down at the table and start talking turkey, rather than, let's discuss the parameters of how we're going to talk turkey in the first place. So we do have that ability to be a little bit more nimble, but you still have to do the work of going out and meeting people and networking and whatnot. It's not like you sign a trade deal with a nation and then turn around and 2 days later, are signing all types of deals with various corporations or whatnot. You still have to make the case to each individual corporation you're going to get in business with, why this is good for them as well, and set all those parameters as well. So, but the biggest block has indeed been taken care of, and because of that, the more we do this over time, we are going to see significantly, how our trade is diversifying and how much trade that we have is moving away from the United States in favor of other places. But we might get some little inklings and some data points here and there, but it won't be until a few years of doing this that we're actually going to start seeing some numbers that are statistically a little more significant and indicates that there's a real move going on. So the Prime Minister in this answer highlights this, and thought that I would bring it to you because there's us saying it, as Mr. Grizzly and Mr. Beavers, two guys who are political junkies who are following this and giving their best assessment based on our abilities, as limited as they may be, and then hearing the Prime Minister himself, who's dabbled and worked in this field all his life, actually say it and confirm that what we've been seeing is exactly what is going on
with the U.S. in that. But let's be absolutely clear. The United States does have tremendous leverage in the near term over Canada, over the European Union, over the United Kingdom, because our economies became linked on the basis of certain assumptions. Those assumptions have now changed. And so part of this is stabilizing that relationship. It's the U.S. right to have different priorities. We respect that they've made that choice. We look to stabilize the trading relationship. Okay, what are the new terms under the new objectives of the United States that are in the best interest of Canada? And then the big thing that we do, and a big part of, I think, why I was elected, was what else are we going to do? And one of the core points that we've made from the start is that we can give ourselves far more than the United States can take away. So we have agency. We can have one Canadian economy. We've taken major moves towards that one Canadian economy.
It takes time.
It takes time. It takes time, but it's worth it because we never want to be in this position again. We never want to be in this position again. And so that's building at home and it's diversifying it abroad. We're having this interview in London. Part of the reason I'm in London is our deepening our trade relationship with the UK and with Europe. Exactly.
Yeah, because 75% of your trade is with the United States. And that now has problems.
And that will change.
Okay.
So there we go. very, very, very important exchange there where he's talking about, yes, in the near term, the United States has more leverage on us because, well, they got to decide when they were going to pull out the rug from out from under us. We weren't prepared. But the more that we are able to adapt, the more we're able to see, okay, rather than crying over the spilt milk, to say, okay, you know what? The United States spilt the milk. Let's mop this up as best as we can. And, let's, change some things to make sure that we can't have this happen to us again. So, right. At first, it takes a little time, and then the host acknowledged that as well. But eventually, that motor gets running. And once you are well established along that path, things seem to grow at a little bit faster rate. And then you can see all the changes. But the Prime Minister here mentioning that there's two tracks. There's what we're trying to do with the United States to get a better deal, but then what else? Right? So far, we have the best deal that is available on offer. It's not as good a deal as we had before. That's the part that doesn't get mentioned. That's where you see spin, right? Like this, we have the best deal now. Yeah, but and she didn't press him. It's not as good as the deal you had before. And that's what the opposition here does in Canada. But nobody around the world's deal is as good as the deal they had before. We're not being singled out for special treatment here. So we do have the best deal. The United States is looking at us, if they're looking at us as, a great number two to their number one, if we don't want to join their number one, right? Then that they're looking at it as in terms of, we have the best competitor advantage out of all the other nations in the world. That's the game now. Right? It's not a tariff-free trade. There's going to be tariff trade for everyone, but some people will have lower tariffs than others. And we are the country that has lower tariffs than others overall for the extent of our trade, the overall amount of our trade. But of course, in certain sectors, the United States, where the United States is, as the Prime Minister said, trying to break us so that they can own us. We have some tariffs that are very much hobbling certain industries and are at the threat of destroying certain of them. Now, if they are successfully destroyed, we will have to find others and adapt and move into those areas. Um, you know, but if there's ways to not have those industries destroyed, we would like that very much, please. So, we're in that area. Um, but he also mentioned something very specific, and this is one thing that conservatives don't seem to acknowledge, is we have agency, right? United States, you're going to do this to us? Okay, well, we're going to do this instead. When the conservatives speak about this, they always speak as if like we can do nothing, that these are things that are just happening to us and that there's nothing that we can do to stop it other than trying to make the volcano gods happy by throwing another virgin into it, right? So, make Donald Trump happy. Just do more at the border. Make Donald Trump happy. Just do like that's what we had at the beginning with all the conservatives, right? He says that they're border issues, so help him do the things at the border. And then we realized that it wasn't about that at all, because we did do stuff at the border, and we saw many other nations do stuff to respond. Right? We all the NATO nations moved to 5% of GDP on defense spending. Did it get them any special tariff reductions? No. Right? None of us got a special deal as a result of that. And there was no moment where the Donald Trump turned around and says, oh, well, you gave me that, so I'm going to give you this. Right? There was no obvious moment of that. So, we're not being singled out for special treatment. So if we don't look at ourselves that way, we look at ourselves, okay, here's the entire chessboard. We do have the best competitive advantage, but we need to be doing other things to shore up for what it is that we've lost and what it is that we can still lose from the United States, because we have a mercurial president that can decide at any second that this thing that you had, you no longer have it anymore because I'm no longer pleased with you. That's the way he works. Um, so yeah, um, in there stating, sending the message very clearly, however, when the journalists reminded us that 75% of our trade is with the United States, and he's talking about diversifying away, it's not going to be 75%. X number of years from now, it's going to be lower. hopefully significantly lower, and we will have more trade with others because, as he had mentioned, we cannot put ourselves in that position again. This is rhetoric I hope that he starts including in his speeches to domestic audiences about not having put ourselves in a bad position and not wanting to be put in that position again, because that is very evocative and it will resonate with a lot of people. But I haven't heard that. That's the first time I've heard it out of his mouth, stating specifically, like, we cannot put ourselves in that position again. And, we need a little bit more of that here. All right. In the next one, she's asking a little bit directly, if there's anything that the Prime Minister has learned from his dealings with President Trump, or learned from Trump specifically.
Have you learned anything from President Trump?
Have I learned? I've learned lots of things from President Trump. You always learn things from people. I've learned that the value, I don't fully subscribe to this, but I see the effectiveness. The value of the term they would use is flooding the zone, of doing multiple things at the same time, and the effectiveness that can have. I think that he has a very effective way, in his own almost unique manner, of framing issues and of dominating the agenda, if I can put that way as well.
So in that, I just wanted to point out there, when he's talking about he doesn't see the value in it, but he sees the effectiveness of it in flooding the zone. Had Prime Minister Trudeau used those words before saying those words about, China and climate change, and, the admiration that China is able to make bold moves on climate very quickly, but, the reason they can do that is because they have a dictatorship. So, that's the part that's not so good. So just if Justin Trudeau said, I see the value in being able to make a quick environmental shift, given how pressing the need is. I don't see the value in dictatorship, but I cannot deny the effectiveness of a dictatorship in getting a nation to move boldly on any project. Right? That might have helped him a little bit with that answer. So just there, the Prime Minister stating that he can notice that a strategy is effective without subscribing to its value. All right. But then the question goes on a little bit. And in this one, the Prime Minister mentions again a principle that we mention a lot on the show. And hopefully you will detect it as soon as he says it.
Wondered about the way that when you cancelled the carbon tax, you signed it on camera with a flourish. It was like executive order style. Have you learned an element of performance, like you have to be seen to be doing the job in a certain way? Because it didn't feel very Canadian to do that, the signing on camera with a flourish.
I think that, I don't know it's interesting. I wouldn't have ascribed it to him per se. I just think that in a time when there is a lot of pressure, people are under a lot of pressure, there's a lot of uncertainty, the value of being very clear. So I'll take the example you used. That was the first day that I became Prime Minister. The first thing we did was to cancel that carbon tax. The next thing I did was to come to Europe, come to the UK, and to the Canadian Arctic, the three founding peoples of Canada, the French, the British, and the Indigenous Canadians, and to underscore our sovereignty, our history, but also to set up trade agreements with the first two, and a major intention to invest in our Arctic in defense and security. And so both of those things had substance. We canceled the carbon tax. Those trips had substance because they were setting up trade agreements and security, but they also had, yes, symbolism, history, sovereignty, action. And when you're in, sorry, Mishal, but when you're in a crisis, particularly, in this case, a trade crisis, an economic crisis, a crisis of sovereignty, given some of the points that President Trump is saying about the 51st state, when you're in a crisis, you need to not just act decisively, but be seen to act decisively. And that's what we were doing.
Can we
So here you go, kids, on that. Hopefully you've noticed that, but it's one of the things that we say often on the show. Sometimes there are things that you do, it's not good enough to do them. People have to see you doing them. And here he was talking about that. Also putting, I'm glad she mentioned that because we had mentioned that on the show too, the signature and whatnot. It looked very Trumpy. She said it didn't look very Canadian. It struck me in that way too. That's why I had mentioned it on the show. But notice him putting it in context here. It was the first day of. And when you add to the fact that Pierre Poilievre was saying that he didn't really do it because he didn't repeal the law, or he didn't really do it, he's just setting this up to bring it back again, or all that type of stuff. So there he was, cameras, signed it, we're taken away. Here, I promised you I would do it. It's done, it's signed. Here we go. Right? The big promise, the one that Pierre made all the hay on, the one that Pierre said that this prime minister would never, ever, 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 ever do. Because not only did I do it, but I signed it. You watched me do it. It's my day one. I said I would do it on day one. Here it is. And then he hasn't done that again. So the being seen part, I can. In that context, all of it makes sense. I still didn't like the symbolism of it. But yes, the concept of being seen to have done it. In this particular case, on that particular file, I can see how it would matter. And I will leave it at that. But again, the Prime Minister explaining his reasoning for having done a move that left a couple of us scratching our heads from time to time. At the moment when it was happening. All right. The Prime Minister is then asked about climate because a lot of people have been wondering, given the cancellation of carbon regulatory fee pricing and all of that kind of stuff, whether or not the values about which he's written in his book, Values, have changed in any way, shape, or form. So let's take a look at what he has to say about that. I want you to know here, kids and cubs, that I've skipped ahead on portions having to do with Palestine and Ukraine. And those I will present in the other episode that I want to do dealing with international issues so that we can move forward here on this one. And I can get this pre-recorded done on time so that our wonderful DAMFAM can see it without having to wait too long, having a delay too long this morning. So we'll go right into the climate stuff. And in this one, you will see that there's a little bit of a shout out or shout taking a moment from that first answer about why he ran, that sort of comes up in this again, having to do with Pierre. But noting that the Prime Minister is very well aware that not only does he have limited financial capital, which he's mentioned a lot because he's talked about doing the most with scarce resources, but is keenly aware about having limited political capital as well.
That.
Yes.
Are we also in a climate crisis?
We are in a climate crisis,
Okay.
yeah.
That's the last time we spoke was at the Glasgow Climate Conference. Grab your headphones because I want to play you something that you said around that time when you were the UN Special Envoy for Climate Action and Finance. Here's what you said.
Human frailties create a tragedy of the horizon. That means the catastrophic impacts of climate change will fall largely on future generations. The current generation, with our horizons fixated on the current news, business, and political cycles, has few direct incentives to solve the issue, even though the sooner we act, the less costly it will be.
You are really well known for these words, this phrase, the tragedy of the horizon. Yep. It's all about how you need to think long term rather than in terms of a short term horizon. And yet in office, you scrapped the consumer carbon tax. You paused the mandate that was pushing car makers to sell more and more electric vehicles. And there are now reports that you are about to drop the cap on emissions from the oil and gas sector. What happened to you?
I'm I'm the same me. I'm focused on the same issues. And the question is, how do you make progress towards those issues? And particularly, how do you make progress in a way that is most effective? How do you make progress most effectively? So I'll break those issues down. The consumer carbon tax was at best going to be responsible for high single-digit proportion of emissions reductions over the course of the next 25 years. So it was something, but it was far from the most important measure that was in place. It was extremely politically divisive, and it would have contributed to a government in place that would have canceled all climate policies in effect. First point. That's the design of that carbon tax, that aspect of the carbon tax relative to.
Yeah, it wasn't perfect. I get
it wasn't
that.
perfect, but so the question is, how do you use scarce government capital, government dollars, taxpayers' dollars, and political capital in order to have the maximum effect? And so the maximum effect. So let me go more directly to what we are doing. So one of the biggest, 20% of the emissions in Canada, thereabouts, comes from the building sector, from houses and commercial buildings. We've done very little in terms of reducing those emissions. We are now embarking on one of the biggest home building measures in our history, which is more than 20% lower embedded carbon in the production of these homes, more than 20% lower carbon footprint in the running of these homes. So that in itself is a housing strategy, it's an economic strategy, but it's a climate strategy at the same time.
So here we have again the Prime Minister essentially mentioning or touching upon what he's been saying about climate competitiveness here when he's looking at building the modular industry. And modular industry, of course, modular home industry would be good for export as well. So if you can create modular home in a manner that is 20% less destructive and in a manner that requires 20% less GHG energy, GHG emissions in order to have the energy or whatever it takes to operate it. And this represents 20% of your nation housing, your 20% of your GHG emissions. All of a sudden, you start talking about some real numbers. So he's basically saying in here that, yes, even though carbon regulatory pricing, it had to go, but it had to go, how would you put it? He took an element that was very divisive and that wasn't going to count for anything like 20% of the reductions, like the housing sector, for example, and said that he felt that this needed to be sacrificed in order to prevent a government coming in, Pierre's, which would have gutted absolutely everything. And since we've sacrificed this, we're doing all these other things now, right? When you look at the projects that he's approved with the major projects office, a lot of them have a green component. I think all of them have a green component, and some of them are actual green projects specifically. Right, copper mines that have zero emissions. New nuclear reactor at Darlington, which has certain environmental issues with regard to the storage of the material, but in terms of emissions, right, it solves an issue there. In this case, working on homes and reducing the climate component there. And some of the projects, there are nearer and shorter term projects, but when you have the further term projects, the Wind West project and Wind East, I think it is project, sorry, off the coast of Nova Scotia, and all these other types of initiatives that he's got, the pathways, carbon capture and storage, for example, those types of things. So that there is a component embedded in everything, and it makes our products more marketable and helps us, reduce our emissions, meet our goals in other ways. So he's kind of looking at it in this capacity, but basically saying that one had to be sacrificed in order to prevent a much worse outcome. And he felt that he could do that and make that amount up in the other initiatives that he is going to put in place. Now we get to the point here where she's going to press him specifically once again on things that he said before and how moves like this could perhaps affect his personal reputation. And once again, we get some insights from the Prime Minister on how it is he sees the job of being Prime Minister.
And yet, reading your book, which is all about values rather than market value, and reading the way that you emphasize that these are urgent issues, that everything you do ought to take you towards a step further towards the common good, which is keeping global temperatures as close to 1.5 degrees as you can. You're the only G7 leader who has been a UN envoy on climate action.
That's
and
true.
The world is crying out for leadership on this, right? President Trump is calling climate change a hoax. Are you in danger of squandering your reputation as a global climate champion because some of your actions are against that ultimate goal?
I'd a few things in what you said. First, it's not about my role as Prime Minister is not about my reputation. My role as Prime Minister is about what's in the best interest of Canada. Canadians care about the world. They care about climate action. They care about their fellow citizens. They care about all of those things. Those values of sustainability and solidarity, fairness are fundamental to Canadians. What we need to do is to be as effective as possible in terms of addressing climate change while growing our economy.
I'm going to stop right here because this is the second time in the interview that the Prime Minister mentions, right, wearing various hats. There's the hat he wears as central banker and international, and then there's a hat that he wears as a prime minister, and making those distinctions. So in this particular case, yes, there's his personal reputation, but his job as prime minister is to ensure this particular thing. On trade with the United States, there's all this stuff, but his job as prime minister is to secure the best possible deal that is available for Canada. Right? So you may aspire to more, you may want more, this, or there's a part of you that may want different things. Mr. Grizzly talked about it on the show a little bit about Jean Chrétien. He says, yes, I'm a Catholic, right? But when I'm a prime minister, everything about my religion stays at the door because I'm the prime minister of all Canadians. And in this job, I cannot have my hat of Jean Chrétien, the Catholic, as Jean Chrétien, the prime minister of a pluralist nation, many of the citizens of which are not Catholic. And I have to serve all of them. So it's a different hat. So the Prime Minister here seems to be recognizing, and has done so twice in this interview, that as Prime Minister, he wears a different hat than as Mark Carney, the UN envoy, or Mark Carney, independent citizen, talking about climate. He has certain constraints, and he has to achieve the same things, but in different ways. Right? He can't just walk in Prime Minister and said, well, I wrote about this in my book, so we're doing this now. And, everything else be damned. There's other considerations, there's negotiations, there's other players, there's other stakeholders that have interests. But the overall principle of how we get there and doing things at every possible stage, embedding stuff at every possible stage in order to help get there, is a value that he hasn't lost and that he's practicing as much as he can as Prime Minister with some of these projects and in shaping these programs. Okay, so now we get to a very specific part here where the Prime Minister gets pressed very much on the issue of the emissions cap. Danielle Smith likes to call it a productions cap, but that he's going to that there's some talk about him removing it, and the difference between a desired stated policy outcome, and an actual result, and where it is that he is focused.
So what are you going to do about emissions from the oil and gas sector?
Well,
there is a cap that's supposed to come in. Is it true that you're considering dropping it?
What we're focused on. You can say there's a cap, but saying a cap doesn't make it happen. What makes the emissions go down in the oil and gas sector, as long as Canada and America are using oil and gas, and we are, our economies are wired for that, as is the rest of the world. What makes those emissions go down will be carbon capture and storage, particularly in other efficiencies.
So you are dropping it then? That's what it sounds like.
dropping emissions from the oil and
Dropping
gas
the
sector.
cap.
Dropping emissions, Mishal, from the oil and gas sector. This is the point. This is about results. The climate cares about results. It doesn't care about a policy that is... An outcome is not a policy. A desired outcome is not a policy.
So I'm getting the strong signals that that particular policy to have a cap on emissions from the oil and gas sector is not going to happen.
An outcome is not a policy. What makes a difference to the climate is whether or not emissions come down. What's required for the Canadian oil sands, in this case, what we're talking about, is carbon and capture and storage. We signaled our first major nation-building project is something called the Pathways, which will get those emissions down. Second thing related to this, and this is crucial from a climate perspective, is ending methane, what's so-called fugitive methane flaring, which is, depending on your horizon, and the horizon that we're all in the next few decades in terms of climate warming, is up to 70 times bigger contributor to climate change than CO2 emissions. And so we have an opportunity. We're working with the industry, working with the provinces to get those emissions, methane emissions, down to zero.
You are explaining the complexity of what you're dealing with. And I guess I just wonder whether the Mark Carney of 2020 would be slightly disappointed in the Mark Carney of 2025.
I think if you look in the Mark, in fact, I know that looking in that book that you've got your hand on, you will see two important things in there. One is a discussion of exactly what I just said, the emissions reductions, and secondly, carbon value for money, which is a fundamental point, which is using scarce public dollars to most efficiently reduce emissions.
So here, in this answer, again, as you can see, Prime Minister has definitely been pressed by Ms. Husain here. But he's basically stating a reality that we've mentioned with, that we witnessed with the abandoned, the orphaned oil wells. Right? You can have all the policy you want. The policy is that the corporations are supposed to clean this up. But, well, we know what the current situation actually is, right? The policy does not necessarily make it such that people do it, right? We have laws against murder. We have laws against drunk driving. Some people still do it anyway. People will do what they will do. So you can have a cap on emissions all you want. If companies are not going to respect it, they're just not going to respect it. If you want actual results, you don't need caps if you actually enforce results. If you give people the tools, or if you mandate that certain tools be used. So it seems that that's where he is going, and he is talking. If we're talking about oil sands specifically, it's going to be hard to produce oil or gas that once it is burned will reduce less emissions. So you have to reduce emissions everywhere else along the process. And here's what he's talking about: carbon capture and storage. If this industry is going to survive, it is going to need that. It is going to have to reduce emissions. And this is the main way by which it probably will be able to achieve that. Now, of course, the conversation has to go to, well, what if that method proves not effective eventually? And then you're going to have to make some other changes. But right now he's saying like this: I could have a cap and people will or will not respect it. And I will have limited tools to make people be able to do that, or we can all decide that we are moving forward on carbon capture and storage, and then actually develop it and implement it at a broad scale, and actually achieve the results of reducing the amount of carbon. So that it's where it seems his focus is. So again, more in, as you mentioned, less on interdiction and more on embedding things into the processes in order to create climate competitiveness. Because again, if there is demand for our products in other nations of the world, but other nations of the world do want to help with a reduction of GHGs and methane emissions, where a focus, which are very specific and extremely important. And it might be, again, with this scarce resources, putting most of those resources into methane reduction first, as much as possible, and then CO2 after, given the various the outsized damage one can do versus the other, even though we do have to act on both. So a little more where you could see his strategy when he says he's going to break it down into components, and he does in this answer here. Um, the next thing that he is being asked about, and this is something that we have talked about on the show, is when he had won a minority, we were a little not dumbfounded. We were not, and sad's not the word, but we were a little deflated in the sense that we were already aware at that time that the projects he was talking about and the new changes that he wanted to do were changes that would require definitely more than one mandate for them to be fully implemented and to start returning results that people can turn around and say, oh my God, wow, this really was a good idea. Right? We've got a minority parliament. So let's say, something happens and the government were to fall within the first 2 years, and then we got another government. We would have spent a lot of money and put a lot of effort into laying the groundwork to make a lot of changes, but a lot of them wouldn't have taken hold yet, and certainly not taken hold to the point where they're yielding benefits for us to be able to point at and say, gee, thank goodness we made that change. That was a smart one. So if the prime minister does want to accomplish everything that he wants to accomplish, he will definitely need 2 full terms, and maybe part of a third one, to be totally honest. But here, there's an acknowledgement here by the host of this reality, and she's mentioned once before in this interview that things will take time. But that there are certain things here that will take time, and basically about his desire already to uh, be requesting or seeking that time from the Canadian public.
Clearly had a really intense few months, and you've made clear what you're up against, right? Yeah. Canada prospered under the old world, and we're not going back to the old world. How long do you plan to serve?
That's a great question. I think that I'm in a minority position, or my party is in a minority position in Parliament. We have we ran on a very strong mandate. In other words, going to do big things that we're going to put the country build the country strong.
But I think you made such big pledges that it's hard to imagine that you could fulfill them in less than a decade. So I imagine you do want to serve 2 terms. You want to build a huge number of houses. You've made a big pledge on defense spending. You're in a tight economic framework where growth is hard to find.
Well, it's a democracy, and you have to ask permission from voters for the time served. I think what's essential, again, we are in a crisis. We're in an economic crisis, this fundamental shift in the world, and we make this point, and I'll make it again. It's not a transition, it's a rupture. It's big changes in a very short period of time. And I know from all my experience that in those situations, you have to act big, you have to act bold. That is what we're going to do. The politics will favorably or unfavorably will result from that, but I don't want to be in a position, however long I serve, where I didn't do what I didn't think was necessary at the time. I need to do what I think is necessary.
And what is it?
Here in this answer, what I like from the Prime Minister here is that he handles it deftly. He's not saying, yes, I want 8 years, or yes, I want 10 years. Give me those. He's not talking as if he has them in the bag. He is realizing that he does have limited time, even more possibly limited than he really hopes that he would have, given that he is in a minority situation. And in that sense, not wanting to squander that time. He's not taking the attitude, it's like, well, I've got this and I'll do a good enough job and I'll get a second term and that will happen. He actually is moving at a speed and a level of decisiveness that takes into account the chance that he might not get another term. An interesting perspective here from the Prime Minister. There's some humility here in that answer, and that he's realizing, I guess, trying to set things up such that if he does not get another term, that somebody else can take up the ball and start running with it, if that is the case, because regardless of whether or not it is him or somebody else, these things need to be done. Then he's being asked a little bit here in the next one about populism. And let's just take a look at this one. I don't want to give it away.
If you don't succeed. We're in an age of rising populism in many countries. In Canada, the old acceptance of immigration has changed a lot, and anti-immigrant sentiment is rising. Do you fear the spectre of populism? Because you've said populists don't know how to run economies.
That's true. They know how to talk about it, but they know how to run economies down. I think I'll answer the question this way. We're doing big things. We're building the economy. And what's important is how we're building as well. We're building, for example, with Indigenous Canadians. There were in these major projects, there'll always be Indigenous participation in the ownership. We are building in an inclusive way with unions. We're creating hundreds of thousands of high-paying, skilled careers. So when I announced our first, when I announced our first batch of nation-building projects, we had the heads of all the major unions were there with me, representing the millions of workers that are part of those unions. We are building sustainably. So when our energy projects, a huge swath of clean energy projects, anything in other sectors is top quartile or top decile in terms of the lowest carbon emissions as well.
Are you
So there you go in this one, mentioning three things here. Participation with Indigenous communities, very, very important to pretty much everything that it is that he is doing wherever the opportunity arises. Again, embedding the climate portions and making these projects, as he's mentioned, that are in the top 25% or top 10% in their fields, in their categories in the world. And then there was a certain third element, and I forgot it off the top of my head, unfortunately. Should have made a note rather than relying on the old noggin memory to mention it there. But when he's talking about these things, like this is how you counter the populism and these anti-everything stances, again, by embedding these features into the projects as well as they go forward, and hopefully are successful. All right. Next, he's asked specifically about his because populism. I like that he makes the point that populists like to talk a good game about the economy, but the only thing they know how to do is run them into the ground. He's now being asked about his level of optimism.
Optimistic about all of this? Because everything that you're signaling these are very hard roads to go down, where there are a lot of high expectations, and arguably your chances of delivering, certainly in the next 5 years, are probably relatively low. So where do you find the optimism?
Well, I think that I know that Canadians recognize the scale of the challenge. They want the government to act. They feel fundamentally that we need to take care of ourselves. That's building for ourselves, and it's diversifying around the world, and they're fundamentally supportive of that. We have to deliver. Canadians are not unrealistic people. They know it won't change overnight, but they need to see us doing everything we can to make sure that it changes for the medium term.
So there we go in that answer as well. You can see that the Prime Minister is placing his trust in Canadians, and that he has confidence in their ability to understand the plan, to follow the plan, and to buy into it and have the patience that is required for the plan to work. Final question that she asked the Prime Minister here she started with the personal question about him growing up, Fort Smith, and how all that was like. And of course, some questions, as he mentioned about earlier, if it was easy to make decisions and why it is that he stood and all that kind of stuff. So once again, she ends going back a little bit into the personal, and you can see that she is moving there, talk about populism and then his sense of optimism, and then coming here, talking about the life of a prime minister, and basically asking what weekends are like. But in this answer, the prime minister gives again another really interesting insight into the type of person he is and how it is that he sees the job.
Can we bring it back to you to close, because this is the Bloomberg weekend interview, and as it happens, we're talking on a weekend. Yeah. That's you've come into the office to record this on a Saturday. What are prime ministerial weekends like for you these days?
They are, well, I took off my tie, so that's a big step. They are pretty indistinguishable from prime ministerial weeks. I mean, certainly when the House of Commons is sitting, then there is a difference between the two. It's pretty fun, you know.
There is no weekend.
There
is that
is,
what you mean?
In effect, there is no weekend, with the sole exception of, on a weekend you can find one evening where, just with the family, you might be able to go Canada in the winter, cross country skiing or something, or for a run, there is some element of that, but it's pretty limited. And that's fine. That's exactly what I would have expected in terms of the scale of the task. And weekend, I don't know if it's a chance to catch up, but it's on work, but it's a chance to plan a bit ahead.
And the space to think. Well, how do you find that? Because
I find
the papers, the staff, the people demanding decisions all the time.
Yes, but part of the job is to create space to think, and after all, the job is to be a leader. And to be a leader, you need to know where you're going, and knowing where you're going means you need a strategy, and that strategy may need to adapt. I mean, the world is changing very rapidly, so if I don't carve out some time on a weekend, for example, to think about strategy, then I'm not doing my job. It's very easy, your question's very on point, because it's very easy to be consumed by the here and now. And there are so many calls on your time. Everybody wants some of your time for valid reasons, that you have to resist some of that to preserve some to chart the course.
Mark Carney, Prime Minister, thank you.
Thank you, Mishal.
So there you have it, kits and cubs, in this last answer from the Prime Minister. Definitely making the case here that we say on the show often, a politician's most valuable asset is their time. And given that there are so many demands on it, they often have to say no. But in this particular case, him also saying that one of the reasons specifically for which a prime minister or leader needs to say no is, if they're going to do that job and do that job well, is to avoid being consumed by the immediacy and the urgency of the here and now, and actually carve out time specifically to think and strategize and plot a course and make adjustments as needed, because that is the job. So a person that clearly knows what the elements are of the job here, and definitely takes time and anchors those things in his schedule to start with, and then puts all the other stuff around it to make sure that the core elements are taken care of, that the unsexy work of sitting there and thinking and planning and talking to people and charting a course, and then that's one part of it, and then going out and trying to find a way to make that a reality is like the second part. But if that first part, you always need to have time for that, because if you don't do that, then events will start controlling you, and you will lose the thread of what is going on. You will lose the plot. So there you go, kits and cubs. Lots of components of his interview with Mishal Husain. A very good interview. You can see diplomatic but very professional, well researched, well prepared, not afraid to press the prime minister on certain things. We got a very quality interview out of it. And as I mentioned, the portions on Ukraine and Palestine, we will present to you in another episode where we'll be talking about some international things going on. All right, kids and cubs, that's the end of this episode of the Daily Beaver Morning Show. We hope that you loved listening to us because we love making this for you. Remember, sharing is caring and word of mouth is priceless. So please tell your peeps and poops all about us. We really appreciate it when you do. Now, kids and cubs, if you would like us to help you because you may be on the go and don't have time to listen to our show live in the mornings, don't worry, because thanks to the Ray Girl, well, right there, if you scan that QR code that has appeared, it will bring you to our pod page. That's podpage.com/the True North Eager Beaver with a hyphen between each one of those words. And when you go there and click subscribe, when we have something fresh off the podcast bandwidth, it will come directly to your favorite podcast feed. And that way you can take us with you, pop us in your ears, and take on the day while remaining informed. There you go. Now, if you would like to help us, kids and cubs, and we could use your help, definitely. And one of the ways you can do that is by grabbing your surfboard and hanging 10 to the True North Eager Beaver Media Incorporated YouTube page. QR code that just appeared in the corner on the screen will bring you there. Kids Cassie and Elaine would certainly approve of you giving a visit and clicking on our buttons like, share, and subscribe because it makes us happy when you do, and it helps us with the algorithm. Now, if you'd like to help us with other ways, kids and cubs, the QR code that's been up in the corner all show long is for our coffee page, or what we call our Eager Beaver Lodge Emergency Hydration Fund. We basically incur some costs to bring the show to you, and we're hoping for a little help from you if you found the content that resonated with you in doing that by donating a few loonies or toonies to our hydration fund to help to keep your favorite beaver moist. Moist beavers are happy beavers indeed. So thank you for all of your support. Again, if you're listening, ko-fi.com/eagerbeaver. All donations, no matter how small, are definitely appreciated and they are very helpful. Thank you so very much. Now, kits and cubs, you can help us in other ways as well financially. We have the super chat on the YouTube page, as well as memberships. And if you're buying Canadian, truenortheagerbeaver@gmail.com is our email address. You can do a direct bank-to-bank transfer so that Brolikarki in the United States does not get a cut of your donation, and we get 100% of it, so it goes further. Thank you so much for that. Now, if you're not able to contribute financially, don't worry, because the gifts of your attention and participation are the ones that matter the most to us. And that same email address, truenortheagerbeaver@gmail.com, can be used to write to us to let us know what you think about the show, good, bad, or ugly, make some guest suggestions, or hey, if you'd like to advertise on our show, especially if you've got a small home-based business, we've definitely got an audience of dedicated Canadians who want to support and buy Canadian. So reach out to us and let us know that you're out there. Thank you so very much. And if you want to reach us via our socials, at True Eager at the Blue Sky Beaver Lodge, or on the Jitter, True North Eager Beaver on Facebook, or if you're listening on YouTube, either live with the DAMFAM or after, well, right here in the comment section down below, let us know what you think. We read absolutely everything you write to us, even though we're not able to respond to everyone. And everything you contribute, whether financial or in word, goes back into the show to make it better. So thank you for everything that you do. Kids and cubs, we very much appreciate you. And remember, there's also the DAMFAM Discord started by you and for you. So please hang out there if you like to keep the fun going. Because democracy is something that you do, forever-canadian.ca. Please go there if you're in Alberta to get a Citizens Initiative ballot question on that will keep Alberta in Canada. Also, if you'd like to contribute financially to them or volunteer as a canvasser, you can find that information on that site, as well as where your pop-up locations are for signatures today. Also, if you want to have a little bit more honesty in the federal government and want to eliminate some misinformation, our guest, Fed Sanchez, was with us not too long ago. Please check out that interview, but also go to ourcommons.ca and look for petition number E-6679 and put your signature on that. We would really appreciate your help in trying to grab the attention of our elected MPs to try to make it such that they might want to engage in a little bit more honesty. Over 35,000 Canadians have signed it so far, and we thank you for joining in on that initiative, kits and cubs. As well, kids and cubs, if you, there's some voting time coming. I think today, the 20th, it's a municipal election day in Alberta. So please make sure that you get out and vote. And I think November 2nd, it is in the province of Quebec. And November 3rd, Yukon Territory, your territorial elections are coming up. So there you go. And for everyone in Canada that went out to march for No Tyrants Day, because here we do have a king, thank you for making your voices heard and for doing democracy. It was a big success, particularly in the United States, but again, around the world, marching in solidarity. So, yeah, fantastic work, everyone. Glad that you're out there making some noise and getting into some good trouble. All right, kids and cubs. I guess words of wisdom. Hurry hard. That's what I'm going to do. So whatever it is, hurry hard, kids and cubs. I love it. I love it. Okay. Since you're not here, I'm going to pretend you are. And I'm going to say, kids and cubs, please, at the count of 3, ask your humble servant to cue the cock on 1, 2, 3. Oh, yes, I know you're not here, but if you were, I know, I am supremely confident in your abilities that you would have done that in a most delightful way that would have compelled me to serve. You are listening to a True North Eager Beaver Media Incorporated podcast. The True North Eager Beaver podcasts are proudly brought to you by our founding sponsors, the Misfit Mysteries from Corvid Moon Publishing, your source for science fiction, fantasy, and cozy mysteries featuring a broad diversity of characters. CanadianTarot.com, their uniquely Canadian online eclectic tarot community, and The Peppermaster, hot pepper sauces made from farm-fresh ingredients to thrill your taste buds and expand your mind. We are grateful to the Crier Media Network for its support, Pete Jarvis for our artwork, and Paul Joseph Something for our opening and closing sequence music.